I know Kung Fu. Show me.
Imagine going back to where it began, back to the Matrix. How do you try to get lightning to strike twice? The original Matrix trilogy was not just a cultural phenomenon.
Now it's just a guilty pleasure.
The dark science fiction tale also changed the way movies look and the way they're made, paving the way for more high-concept action movies and arguably comic book movies.
But I believe with the right push, they can be exactly what we need.
18 years after the final film in the trilogy hit theaters, Lana Wachowski has brought back the franchise that made the Wachowskis a household name.
Whoa.
What did they do to recapture the magic? Neo's flying routine was one of the defining elements of the series, along with a host of gravity-defying stunts and set pieces. When the architect put Thomas Anderson back in his pod, he couldn't shake the feeling that once upon a time, he could slip the surly bonds of Earth at will. In fact, his crisis moment came when he appeared to want to step off a building. Turns out you need two to tango in the new Matrix as binaries become even more important. And it was Trinity that lightened their steps. While The Matrix is a science fiction fantasy that suggests that the real world isn't so real after all, Lana Wachowski hones that illusion by making the real part of the world, well, real. That means that Keanu and co-star Carrie-Anne Moss had to actually step off a 46-story building. And then, again, Reeves told Stephen Colbert during The Late Show that the pair performed the stunt 19 to 20 times. In stark contrast to the franchises that populate theaters today, the original Matrix had a solid and clear ending. In fact, they made a big deal about it, with characters saying out loud more than once that everything that begins also ends. For The Matrix, that ending had happened 6 times already, much to the frustration of the architect, who found that choice was the biggest bugaboo of his creation. This time around, however, Neo chose another path, finding a way to coexist with the machines while also putting an end to Agent Smith's own choice to go rogue and start messing things up. Neo believed in his quest enough for him to sacrifice himself to make sure it happened. The last we see of Neo was his body being carted off by the machines. So you could be forgiven for being a little confused at seeing Neo walking around in the Matrix again, as if nothing happened. It confused Keanu as well. On Graham Norton, Reeves related the moment Lana Wachowski texted him about returning to the Matrix.
I went, "What? That sounds amazing, but I'm dead."
To which she said,
"Are you?"
There are a lot of stories that travel around the entertainment business about various stars and high-profile people behind the camera. Some of them are bad, some of them are silly, and others are bizarre. Keanu Reeves had managed to garner near-universal praise for being a really good, down-to-earth guy. The first Matrix series, Reeves was noted for the gift he gave his stunt team. They each got motorcycles. The only thing I ever get is a bag with the movie's name on it. Some of the cast for Resurrections were kids when the Matrix movie came out, and were nervous about working with someone who became one of the more bankable stars since the Matrix. It turns out that Reeves' reputation was well earned. Jessica Henwick, who plays Bugs, as in Bunny, in Resurrection, told The Vulture that usually seasoned actors come in with an inflexible sense of how they wanted to do their scenes. But Reeves kept things light and collaborative, which she found refreshing and easy to work with. Probably didn't get a motorcycle though. Matrix Resurrections pokes more than a little meta fun at one of the most defining elements of the original Matrix, the bullet time effect. In order to demonstrate that Neo had essentially hacked reality and could now see and control the Matrix, they came up with a unique method of filming the action. Several cameras were overlapped into an arc around the subject, allowing them to film in slow motion or even freeze frame, while still moving the camera around the subject, creating a defining effect that was quickly copied, imitated, and parodied. 18 years later, and Lana Wachowski is over bullet time. Characters in the movie tasked with creating a sequel to the in-movie Matrix game suggest in a montage that what people look for in the Matrix is the signature effect, a jab at reductionist theories about what makes iconic stories work. Wachowski wasn't eager to return to bullet time because it was a post-production heavy technique that she feels slowed down her creative process. But that didn't mean she was done with mind-bending effects. For a key scene where a character moves at normal and fast speed, while another moves in slow motion, she modified a stereoscope rig meant for 3D movies. But instead of offset images, both shot the same frame, one at 120 frames per second and the other at 8. The two shots were merged in post and played back at 24 frames per second, the standard frame rate for film, creating the combination slow and fast movement. Trinity's Awakening also saw a brief return of the bullet time rig, filming her at slightly different angles as her real identity breaks through, which is shown radiating out of her. Matrix Resurrections has a few choice things to say about reboots and endless franchises, and it's not subtle. Undercover Agent Smith tells Thomas Anderson that they've been drafted to revisit their hit title, The Matrix, at the behest of their corporate overlords, Warner Brothers, the studio that happens to distribute the Matrix series. Not only have they requested a visit to the Matrix, Undercover Smith reveals that if they don't do it, Warner Brothers will just do it without them.
They informed me they're gonna do it with or without us.
I thought they couldn't do that.
That part, it turned out, was not fiction. In our supposedly real world, Warner Brothers was in fact intent to squeeze the Matrix money bag, and while they'd have preferred if the Wachowskis were on board, it wasn't a requirement. Both Lana and Lily had expressed publicly that they had no interest in returning to their signature franchise, feeling they had told that story and were on to tell new ones. Lily remained uninterested, citing exhaustion from finishing the other current projects. Or maybe she just really didn't want to go back and didn't.
I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end.
Making a movie is a tricky process. First, someone gets an idea and they have to find a way to convince someone else that the idea is worth spending a truckload of money on. Then they have to write a script that hopefully suggests what the movie would look like. Then a whole bunch of people get together and film the thing based on availability and use of space. So it's all out of order. And the effect shots don't look like they're going to look, so they have to pretend it looks like what it's going to look like. Then someone sits in a dark room and tries to cut all of that together. And then they have to do it to a score that doesn't actually exist yet.
What do you want me to do about it?
Often they'll use temp music, but that can end up pushing the score to mimic the music the editor used. To avoid this, Matrix composers Johnny Klimek and Tom Tykwer composed a small suite of music, and cues with stems of additional music that could be used as temp music, that would be adjusted by supervising music editor Gabriel Moonzi, who would smooth it over so that it synced regardless of the original tempo. This meant that the movie was always cut to the Resurrection score. San Francisco is not a very big city, and the part that people recognize as San Francisco is even smaller. That contributes to some of the charm for the city by the bay. But when two major productions are filming sequels in the city at the same time, that can get tricky.
I know it doesn't seem fair.
Especially when those sequels are massive action movies, which is exactly what happened while Matrix Resurrections was being filmed. While Neo and Trinity were discovering they were alive only to be trapped again in a simulation, this time powered by their minds, down the street, Eddie Brock and the symbiote known as Venom were having relationship issues while Carnage was busy breaking stuff. The result? Venom, Let There Be Carnage got a little extra production value thanks to The Matrix. In an interview with ScreenRant, Venom locations manager revealed that the helicopters searching for Venom and Carnage, while they were atop the Coit Tower, were in fact looking for Neo, because they were being used in a sequence for The Matrix. The Let There Be Carnage crew had to move some stunts because The Matrix had most of downtown locked up for their own filming purposes. So if Lana Wachowski was so against coming back to The Matrix, what was it that finally convinced her? Turns out it was a way for her to work through some personal tragedy of her own. The Wachowskis lost both of their parents in the same year, and it took an emotional toll on the siblings. During the San Francisco premiere, she told the Associated Press, "I needed something to help me with the grief, and inventing a story where two people come back to life was healing and comforting, and I was non-judgmental. I just wrote it." Warner Brothers had been looking at stories to tell in The Matrix before Lana changed her mind and came on board, but none of them really worked. But the story she wrote brought Keanu Reeves back as well, who remarked that he wanted to revisit the character to examine the past, comparing it to where he is now and what he would feel was important about it. Honestly, most filmmakers not named James Cameron live to develop something as innovative and influential as bullet time, and would build their careers around it if they could. Leaving Las Vegas director Mike Figgis licensed his special handheld camera mount to Manfrotto, who sells it as a Fig Rig. But Lana has said that bullet time is too post-production intensive and slows down the filming process. So she looked for other ways to give her and her sister's films a unique look. Instead of the massive rig with several cameras, she has become enamored with the Steadicam, a body-mounted camera system that holds the camera smooth no matter what movements the operator makes. Generally speaking, directors will sit under a pop-up, watching monitors in a place called Video Village. But Lana is known to get in on the action, moving with the Steadicam operator. She said that it becomes this four-legged creature with one big eye, but it also gives her a chance to engage with the actors during the scene in real time. Obviously, color is a big thing in The Matrix, and not just when it comes to pills. When the original came out, business computers were still largely relegated to plain black screens, with green text that would slowly erode the worker's soul. So inside The Matrix, that green permeated the scenes contrasted with the dull blue tint of the real world. Computers have come a long way, so this time The Matrix reflected that, using brighter postcard-like colors to convince the people in it that it was real. This was contrasted with the real world by using cooler colors with more contrast. You know what was probably the hardest thing about filming Matrix Resurrections was getting the analysts Katt Deja Vu to cooperate. Cats don't care about your movie. They can smell the crafty table and the people at hair and makeup look like they're petters.
Deja vu.
What did you just say?
Nothing, just had a little deja vu.